Grandma, Daddy said if I tell you, he'll be very mad. I was stunned into silence as Ethan whispered from under the dining table. The family dinner, which had seemed so warm with steaming dishes and cheerful chatter, had its entire world collapse with the boy's hushed words. My hands trembled, and the spoon fell from my grasp, clattering coldly onto the plate. My heart pounded erratically. I looked at Michael, my son, casually picking at his meat, a forced smile on his lips, as if nothing had happened. But in my eyes at that moment, his smile became a jagged scar, concealing a darkness I had never dared to imagine. In that instant, I knew this family meal was no longer a place of kinship. It was a chessboard, where the truth was about to be laid bare, and I, a grandmother, a mother, had to face the terrible truth that awaited. I am Linda, and I am 65 years old. People often say old age is a time for rest and peaceful enjoyment with one's children and grandchildren. But for me, that so-called peace is merely a distant illusion. After my husband passed away 15 years ago, I poured all my love and strength into raising Michael, my only son, into adulthood. I believed that if I sacrificed enough, my son would love me, care for me, and appreciate what I had done. Michael used to be a kind boy, always holding my hand when we crossed the street, or bringing me a wildflower saying, "This is for you, Mom." I remember cold winter days when we sat by the glowing charcoal stove, eating stale bread that still tasted sweet. Back then, Michael looked at me with bright, sparkling eyes and promised, "Mom, when I grow up, I'll take care of you. Don't you worry about anything." Yet, how quickly people change. I don't know when Michael became so cold and calculating. Now every conversation revolves around money, contracts, or property deeds. Michael's eyes no longer hold the boy from the past, only a harsh calculation. Ethan, my grandson, is just like Michael was when he was little. Innocent, cheerful, he loves to sit on my lap and listen to stories. I never expected that this child, with an unintentional whisper, would open the door to the darkest truth of my family. There are nights I lie awake, and when I close my eyes, I see a young Michael, his bare feet running on the red dirt road. He used to cling to my skirt, his face beaming. "Mom, when I grow up, I'll buy you a big house so you don't have to work so hard anymore." We were poor then, but rich in love. I worked as a seamstress, my fingers bleeding from needle pricks, just to save enough to buy him new clothes for Tet. I vividly remember a cold winter morning when Michael was 10. He shyly put a lopsided wool scarf, knitted from scraps he begged from the neighbor, into my hand. He whispered, "Mom, I want you to be warm." I cried, hugged him, and vowed to protect him my entire life. But now, looking at Michael sitting in this sprawling house that I helped build, I no longer see that child. Instead, I see a man with sharp eyes, his hands clutching stacks of documents, constantly repeating, "Mom, you have to sign. If you don't sign, I can't manage." I once thought his childhood promise would be a spiritual anchor, always drawing him back to me. But that very promise now feels like a deep stab, because he has completely forgotten, even betrayed, the most sacred things. In Ethan's eyes today, I see the innocent light that once shone so brightly in Michael. But will that light be swallowed by darkness, as it was for my son? This question weighs heavily on my heart, and I know Ethan's accidental whisper could change everything. That evening, after dinner, I sat in my old armchair, and Ethan climbed onto my lap. He rested his head on my chest, his hair smelling faintly sweet, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my conversation with Michael that afternoon. "Grandma," he murmured, his voice as soft as if afraid of being overheard. "Yes, go on, Ethan." "Does Daddy scold you a lot?" The unexpected question made my heart ache. I forced a smile and stroked his hair. "No, dear. Adults just get angry sometimes." Ethan shook his head, his eyes glistening. "No, it's not like that. I heard Daddy call you a burden. I don't like that. I want you to stay with me forever." I held him tightly, my arms feeling like a fragile shield against the world. Ethan's words were both innocent and cruel, for they etched into me the harsh reality. The son I raised now considered his own mother a burden. "Ethan," I choked out, "your father used to say the same things you're saying now. He said he would take care of her, protect her. But you have to promise me one thing. No matter what happens, always live with kindness. Don't lose your compassionate heart." The boy looked at me for a long time, then nodded vigorously. "I promise. I will protect you." At that moment, I felt a sliver of hope, yet also a premonition of the storms to come. Because when a child has to utter such words, it means that within this home, things that should not exist have already taken root. And Ethan, with his innocence, unintentionally became the key that unlocked all the secrets Michael was trying to hide. I began to suspect from the day the neighborhood grocer paid me a visit, lowering his voice to ask, "Mrs. Linda, I heard you sold that plot of land at the end of the road. Why didn't you say anything to me? I was planning to make an offer." My ears began to ring. That land was precisely where my husband, before he passed, had told me, "Keep it for your children and grandchildren. Don't let anyone touch it." I had never signed any paperwork. And yet, sold? That evening, I called Michael over. "Son, do you know anything about the land sale?" Michael sneered, his voice full of confidence. "Mom, that land was just sitting there unused. I sold it to get capital for my business. Later, the profits will be many times greater, and you'll benefit from it." I was stunned. You dared to sell it without my permission?" "Oh, Mom, I've had all the property deeds for a long time. You don't understand legal matters, so why bother? Just let me handle it." Every word from my son was like a knife cutting into my heart. I trembled. "But that was your father's keepsake. He told us to preserve it for future generations." Michael shrugged, his eyes cold. "Dad is gone. We have to be practical. Money is what sustains this family." I looked at my son, who had promised to protect me, now brazenly admitting to betraying his father's trust. My heart was filled with both rage and helplessness. Ethan sat in the corner, quietly hugging his teddy bear, his round eyes showing a hint of confusion. He was listening to everything. That night, I couldn't sleep. I rummaged through the old filing cabinets, looking for the land title deed and property papers, but they were empty. Everything had disappeared. I felt like someone lost in the darkness, alone in a house that was once mine, but had suddenly become a strange place. The next morning, the neighbors were whispering about a construction company that had just signed a contract with Michael. I went to the company's office, only to receive a cold reply. "We have a legally binding contract. Mr. Michael possesses all the necessary documents, duly notarized." I left, my legs trembling. Only one question echoed in my mind. Where did those legal documents come from? And in that moment, I understood that this was only the beginning. Michael no longer saw me as his mother. I had become merely an obstacle in his path to wealth. Just a week after the land incident, I received a strange envelope containing a notice from the bank. They demanded I pay off a debt of over $200,000, stating, "Loan secured against property registered in the name of Linda Johnson." I was speechless. I had never borrowed a single cent in my life. I lived frugally, saving every penny of my pension, never daring to spend extravagantly. How could I now be burdened with this enormous debt? I immediately went to the bank, trembling as I placed the paper on the counter. "Excuse me, I believe there's been a mistake here. I never signed for a loan." The staff member flipped through the file, casually saying, "Here, please take a look. The loan application clearly shows your signature, along with your identification and the land use rights registered in your name." I looked at the paper. It was indeed my name, but the handwriting was scrawled and stiff, nothing like the familiar signature I had used for the past 60 years. I cried out, "This is a forgery! Who submitted this application?" The staff member simply shrugged. "You'll have to take it to court if you believe it's forged." To us, all procedures were valid. I left the bank, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Upon returning home, I slammed the file down on the table in front of Michael. "What have you done? Did you use my papers as collateral? Did you forge my signature?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his face nonchalant. "Mother, don't make such a fuss. This was a necessary step. I borrowed money for working capital. In just a few years, we'll pay it back. What are you worried about?" "You call this looking out for the family? This is fraud." "How dare you use my name as a debtor?" Michael frowned, his voice deepening. "Mother, you're old now. Don't stand in my way. You have to trust me, or you'll be the one to suffer the consequences." In that moment, I clearly sensed that my son's eyes no longer held any trace of the child he once was. He looked at me as if I were an obstacle, a tool to be exploited to the very end. That evening, Ethan crept to my side, his small hand resting on mine. "Grandma, I saw Dad take some papers from your room. Dad asked me to sign a few letters. I didn't understand. I thought it was just a game." Hearing this, my heart felt like it stopped. My son hadn't just forged documents. He had also forced his own child, an 8-year-old boy, to participate in his deceit. I looked at Ethan, pulling him close, tears streaming down my face. "It's okay, darling. It's not your fault at all. All the fault lies with the adults." But in my heart, I knew, from this moment on, things would no longer be a simple family dispute. This was a crime, and I, a 65-year-old woman, would have to fight my own flesh and blood. After the shock of the forged documents, I decided to install a small camera in the living room, not to spy on anyone, but to have evidence if Michael continued his shady dealings. I thought that at least, when the truth came out, I wouldn't be dismissed as a senile old woman making things up. But just a few days later, when I returned from the market, I found the camera had disappeared. The socket still bore a burnt plastic smell, as if someone had deliberately removed and damaged it. "Michael!" I shrieked. He emerged from his study, still holding his phone, and smirked. "You thought you could film me secretly? This house is mine. Don't play these sneaky games." I trembled with anger. "You want to erase all traces, don't you? Afraid others will see your true face?" Michael slammed his phone on the table and approached, his voice dripping with menace. "Do you know the pressure I've been under? All for my future, for money, for fame. If you keep standing in my way, don't blame me." His roar echoed throughout the house. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Just then, the door creaked open, and Mrs. Davis, our next-door neighbor, peeked in. She said, her voice trembling, "Linda, I'm so sorry. I was passing by and heard the shouting. I saw Michael grab your hand tightly. What's going on?" Michael immediately spun around, forcing a smile. "It's nothing, just a small argument. Old people tend to forget, so I had to remind her." But Mrs. Davis wasn't convinced. I caught her worried gaze, and she gave me a slight nod, as if understanding I was being cornered. When Michael left, Mrs. Davis leaned in and whispered, "I recorded it, Linda. I had my phone on when I heard the noise. If you need it, I'll be a witness." I clasped her hand tightly, tears streaming down my face. In the darkness of despair, a flicker of light began to appear. But I knew that to stand up, I needed more than a recording. I needed courage. That night, Ethan hugged his teddy bear and softly asked, "Grandma, why does Daddy keep yelling? Doesn't he love you anymore?" I hugged him tightly, my voice choked with emotion. "Grandma still loves your father, but sometimes grown-ups let darkness cloud their vision. You just need to remember, you must never be like that." In that moment, I knew the real battle had begun. And this time, I was no longer alone. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the room, Ethan hesitantly walked in. His face was pale, and he clutched his old teddy bear tightly. I looked at the boy, feeling a heavy burden pressing down on his young soul. "Grandma, I have something to tell you. But you have to promise not to tell Daddy." I quickly pulled him into my arms and whispered, "Don't worry, I'll keep your secret." Ethan took a deep breath and began hesitantly. "Daddy, he made me sign some papers. I don't know what they are. I just saw Grandma's name and a lot of strange words. He told me to write the first letter of my name, like a witness. If I didn't, he would get very angry." I froze, my whole body turning cold. An 8-year-old child, acting as a witness in a paper fraud scheme. My heart ached at the thought of Michael placing a pen in his son's hand, forcing him to sign deceitful documents. "Did you keep any of the papers?" I asked, my voice cracking. Ethan nodded slightly, then pulled a folded set of papers from his school backpack. The paper was crumpled, with a few ink stains, but clearly visible were my forged signature and, at the bottom, Ethan's innocent handwriting, a few crooked letters, an unintentional piece of incriminating evidence left behind. My hands trembled as I held the stack of papers. This was the crucial clue. I felt a pang of pity for Ethan, yet my heart ached to the core. That innocent child had been dragged into his father's dark vortex. "Ethan, listen to Grandma." I knelt down, looking directly into his clear eyes. "It's not your fault. You were just doing what your father told you. But from now on, whenever your father tells you to sign something, you must run straight to me. Do you understand?" He nodded, his eyes welling up. "I'm so scared, Grandma. I don't want to do bad things." I hugged him tightly, my heart feeling like it was shattering into pieces. "I will protect you. I promise." That evening, when Michael walked into the house, my gaze was different. No longer was it fearful evasion, but a clear-headed determination. And in the darkness, I thought to myself, "Michael, you've gone too far. You didn't just betray your mother, but you destroyed your own son. From now on, you will have to face the consequences." That day, the family gathered for Ethan's birthday. The room was filled with laughter, cake, and balloons everywhere. Everyone thought it would be a warm day, but in my heart, a fire smoldered, because I knew, if I remained silent, Michael would only push further. As everyone raised their glasses, I stood up. My voice trembled, but was resolute. "Excuse me, everyone. I have something to say today." Michael paused slightly, then immediately put on a forced smile. "Mom, today is Ethan's happy day. We can talk about it later." "No, I must say it today because the truth can no longer wait." The entire dinner table fell silent. I took out the crumpled papers Ethan had given me and held them up for everyone to see. "This is proof that Michael forged my signature and even forced our son to sign. He used my documents to take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in bank loans and sold the land my father left me. Is that true, Michael?" Murmurs erupted. Some relatives' jaws dropped, and they looked at each other in astonishment. Ethan, sitting beside me, clutched my hand, trembling, his eyes teary. Michael's face changed for a moment, then he let out a forced laugh. "What are you talking about, Mom? Those papers were just a game. Ethan playfully wrote a few things and you took it seriously. Don't make a scene at Ethan's birthday party." I slammed the stack of papers onto the table, my voice rising. "You dare call this a game? An 8-year-old child forced to sign loan documents? Is this the mother-son love you show me? Is this the responsibility of a father?" The air became suffocatingly heavy. Harsh whispers spread around the table. A relative exclaimed, "Michael, is that true? If it is, then you've not only betrayed your mother, but you've also committed a crime." Michael narrowed his eyes, glaring at me menacingly, but this time I was no longer afraid. I held Ethan's hand tightly and raised my head. "You can threaten me in the dark, but today, in front of the family, I will not let you hide anymore." The room suddenly fell silent. All eyes turned to Michael, my son, whose true nature was now exposed. As soon as I exposed him at the dining table, the atmosphere became tense. An elder uncle tapped his glass and said decisively, "All right, this cannot be ignored. We will have a family meeting right now to clarify things." Everyone gathered in the living room. Chairs were placed close together, and everyone's face was heavy. Ethan sat nestled beside me, his eyes red-rimmed. Michael crossed his arms, leaning back as if this were just a ridiculous play. "Michael," an uncle said, "do you have any explanation? The documents Mrs. Linda presented are truly suspicious." Michael chuckled, his voice saccharine. "Uncle, my mother is old, her memory is not clear. In fact, the land was already agreed to be sold. I was just helping her with the paperwork, but because she forgot, she now thinks I'm a fraud." I stood up abruptly, choked with anger. "You dare say I have memory loss? I clearly remember your father's dying wish to keep the land. I never signed any papers." Michael remained unfazed, turning to the relatives and smoothly fabricating a story. "Actually, Mother herself gave me the documents. She even said, 'Keep them, I'm old, I don't need these things anymore. I have sacrificed so many years caring for the family, and now I just want to use the land to build a better future for Ethan.'" Some relatives began to whisper. Some tilted their heads, skeptical. I saw Michael's intention clearly, to portray me as a senile old woman and himself as a filial son. I trembled with anger, but tried to remain calm. "What about the bank loan? They sent demand letters to my doorstep with forged signatures. Don't tell me that was also voluntary." Michael narrowed his eyes slightly, then added another layer to his fabrication. "That loan was to save you, Mother. You have a heart condition. Who would pay for your medical expenses? I had to take out the loan to manage. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't be sitting here now." The entire room erupted in murmurs. Some relatives looked at me with pity, seemingly convinced by Michael's smooth words. I choked back a sob, hugging Ethan tightly. "No, it's all lies. I am not sick. I am healthy." Michael is fabricating stories to cover his own guilt. But Michael had skillfully manipulated public opinion within the family, portraying me as frail and forgetful, while donning the mantle of a devoted son. A glint of triumph flickered in his eyes, as if to say, "You can't win against me in front of everyone." The room felt suffocatingly heavy. Some relatives leaned towards Michael, shaking their heads at me with pity. I gripped Ethan's hand tightly, my heart swelling with suppressed indignation. Had I already lost in the first round? But just then, a knock echoed at the door. Mrs. Davis, our next-door neighbor, entered, holding a phone. "I apologize for my uninvited arrival, but I couldn't stay silent about this matter." Everyone turned, surprised. Mrs. Davis took a deep breath and then opened her phone. "The other day, when I heard the shouting, I recorded this video. I thought, perhaps Mrs. Linda would need it." The room fell into silence. On the screen, Michael appeared, yelling in the living room, "Don't stand in my way! If you don't sign, you'll face the consequences!" Michael's voice rang out clearly, along with the image of him gripping my wrist. The faces that had been skeptical immediately changed expression. One aunt exclaimed in a panic, "My goodness, Michael, we just saw it with our own eyes. How could you treat your mother like that?" Michael stood frozen, his face growing paler. He stammered, That was just a misunderstanding. I was stressed with work, so I raised my voice, but I didn't mean to?" I cut him off, my voice firm. "The video says it all. You dare yell at your mother, force me to sign documents, and then try to pin all the blame on me. Is this your filial piety?" The atmosphere shifted in an instant. The relatives who had been silent now questioned Michael en masse. "Did you really forge the signature? Are you selling the ancestral land for money? You even dragged Ethan into this?" Michael tried to resist, but each sentence, each gaze, was like a knife slicing through the facade he had built. His once cold face contorted, sweat beading on his forehead. Ethan squeezed my hand, whispering, "Grandma, you don't have to be afraid anymore. They've seen the truth." I bent down and kissed the soft hair on his head. In my heart, I knew this was just the first step. But at least I was no longer alone. Justice had begun to speak. And for the first time in months of darkness, I looked directly into Michael's eyes without trembling. "This game has just begun, my son." After the tumultuous family meeting, I knew it was time to act. The shouting, the forged documents, and Mrs. Davis's video, all of it couldn't just remain accusations within the family. I needed justice, and justice could only come from the law. I found a small law office in the city. Sitting across from me was Mr. Richard, a lawyer with salt and pepper hair, his eyes stern yet warm. Trembling, I presented the papers Ethan had accidentally kept, along with the video Mrs. Davis had recorded. He flipped through each page, nodded, then looked up and said, "Mrs. Linda, this is very important evidence. The forged signature is too obvious, and there was the involvement of a minor. We can absolutely file a lawsuit. I will file a request for the court to freeze all assets belonging to Michael Johnson to prevent their disposal." Hearing this, my heart tightened while a glimmer of hope ignited. I nodded, tears falling onto the back of my hand. "Please help me. I don't want to lose everything my husband left behind. More importantly, I don't want my grandson to grow up in lies." A few days later, Michael received official notification. All bank accounts and real estate in his name were temporarily frozen pending trial. I still remember his face then, ashen, his eyes blazing with fury, his hands clenched white. "You dare hire a lawyer to sue your own son?" Michael roared, his voice a mix of shock and rage. I stood tall, for the first time not avoiding his gaze. "You are no longer the child I raised. You have become a greedy person, and I will not let you destroy this family any further." Michael slammed his fist on the table, shattering the glass. Ethan clung to me in fear, but I no longer trembled. I knew that even though a long battle lay ahead, I had a weapon in hand, the law. The asset freeze notice was like a knife to Michael's pride. Just a week later, I heard he had started making arrangements. Familiar neighbors recounted seeing Michael coming and going from expensive law offices, dressed sharply, all smiles and handshakes, as if he still controlled everything. Not long after, I received a call from Mr. Richard himself, my lawyer. He sighed, his voice heavy. "Ms. Linda, Michael's side has hired a very strong legal team, known for their willingness to use any legal loophole to turn the situation around. I also received word that he is approaching witnesses, possibly to bribe them." I was stunned. Indeed, a few days later, Mrs. Davis came to see me, her face troubled. "Linda, I have to tell you the truth. Michael came to see me, carrying a thick envelope. He said that if I withdrew the video, saying I had misheard, I would have money to fix up the old house." Mrs. Davis nervously opened her handbag and pulled out the envelope she hadn't yet accepted. I could clearly see stacks of bills inside. "I can't accept this money, Linda, but I'm afraid he might approach others." Hearing this, my heart tightened. Michael wasn't just bending the law. He was using money to silence everyone. He believed that justice could also be bought with dollars. That afternoon, I confronted Michael in the yard myself. I said, my voice laced with venom, "Do you think money will save you? You can bribe a few people, but you can't buy the truth." Michael gave a dismissive laugh, his eyes burning with arrogance. "Mother, you are too naive. In this world, the strongest thing is not family ties, nor justice, but money. With money, you can bury everything." I looked at my son, my heart filled with both pain and coldness. He had gone too far. There was no turning back. But I knew that as soon as one piece fell from the chessboard he had set up, the entire facade would crumble. Ethan, hidden behind the door at that moment, gently squeezed my hand. "Grandma, don't be afraid. I still have something Dad doesn't know about. The child's clear eyes sent a shiver down my spine. Perhaps it was he, not lawyers or bankers, who was the key to turning this game around. That evening, after the tense encounter with Michael, I sat in my room, my heart still trembling. Ethan softly knocked and placed his school backpack in front of me. His voice was a whisper, full of worry. "Grandma, I think this is important. Dad told me to throw it away, but I was scared, so I kept it." My hands trembled as I opened the backpack. Inside was a hastily folded file, its paper edges stained with watermarks. As I pulled it out, I was frozen. It was the original loan agreement, complete with the bank's seal, forged signatures in my name, and most notably, Ethan's scribbled handwriting at the bottom corner. I was stunned. This was the link Michael had carelessly exposed. Evidence that he not only forged his own mother's name, but also involved a minor in fraudulent activity. "Ethan, where did you get this?" I asked, my voice choked. The boy stammered. "Dad put it in the desk drawer. Dad said to throw it away the next day, but I secretly took it and put it in my backpack for school." I was afraid. If it got lost, Grandma would have no way. I hugged my grandson tightly, tears streaming down my face. An 8-year-old child carried such a heavy burden simply because his father had turned him into a pawn. The very next morning, I gave all the documents to Lawyer Richard. He examined them intently, then looked up with bright eyes. "Miss Linda, this is the crucial evidence. In the eyes of the law, coercing a minor to sign is invalid, and can even constitute the crime of coercion and fraud. Michael has no room to deny it." My heart felt like it was exploding. I knew this battle wasn't over, but I held the trump card. It was no longer just an accusation, but irrefutable evidence in court. That afternoon, Michael stormed in, slamming the stack of court notices onto the table. "What are you doing, Mother? Do you want to see me in jail?" I looked up, my gaze calm yet sharp. "It's not that I want to. You pushed yourself into it. You dared to turn your own son into a tool, and now you must pay the price." Michael roared, but for the first time in his rage, I heard panic. Ethan stood behind me, clutching the hem of my shirt, and whispered, "Grandma, you won, didn't you?" I bent down, stroked his hair, and whispered, "We've only just begun, my dear. But this time, I have you by my side." News of the lawsuit quickly leaked. It started as rumors in the neighborhood, but then a young reporter from the local newspaper came to my house. She introduced herself as Sarah, her eyes sharp but her voice gentle. "Ms. Linda, we heard about a dispute over assets and document fraud involving your family. If you don't mind, could you tell us the truth?" I hesitated for a moment. My entire life, I had never wanted to expose my private affairs. But thinking of Ethan, my grandson, forced to sign fraudulent documents, I clenched my fist. Justice needs light, and public opinion is the lamp. I showed Sarah the original contract Ethan had kept, along with the video Mrs. Davis recorded. Her eyes widened, and she said sternly, "This isn't just a family dispute. This is a case of forgery, financial fraud, and child endangerment. I will report on this, but you must be prepared. This story will cause a sensation when it goes public." 2 days later, the newspaper published an article with a large headline, "Businessman Michael Johnson accused of forging documents, forcing 8-year-old son to sign loan agreement." The article spread rapidly. Numerous other news outlets jumped in to report. On social media, hundreds of comments exploded. "Oh my God, how can a father be like that? So greedy they'd exploit their own son. Poor Ms. Linda and the boy." I read every line, tears falling like rain. No one doubted I was a confused old woman anymore. The truth had spread beyond the family walls, becoming the community's outrage. Michael was different. I watched him smash a glass cup, yelling in his office, "These reporters want to ruin my reputation. I won't let them. But I knew that once public opinion exploded, he couldn't control it anymore. In just one night, the name Michael Johnson became the talk of the neighborhood. People whispered at the market, chatted at cafes, even on the bus. Everyone was furious. An educated man of status would exploit his own mother and son. In the morning, as I stepped out the door, I saw Mrs. Davis and a few neighbors waiting. They held my hands tightly and said directly, "Linda, you are not alone. We will stand by you. Michael has boasted and bullied neighbors with money and power many times. Now everyone sees his true face." An elderly gentleman added, "I've seen him yell at you, but I didn't dare interfere. Now I will be a witness whenever the court needs me." That statement made my heart tremble. For years I thought I was alone. But it turned out there were eyes watching, just waiting for the moment to speak up. Not long after, a group of community members organized a small gathering at the community center. They publicly criticized Michael, signed a collective petition to the local government, demanding a thorough investigation into his business dealings. Applause and stern words echoed, "We cannot let someone like that continue to stand above the law. We must protect Ethan and Mrs. Linda." The news reached Michael. That evening he stormed home, his face red with anger. "Are you happy now? The whole neighborhood is pointing fingers at me. Meetings, petitions. You instigated all of it." I looked at him calmly and replied concisely, "No, Michael. That is the voice of conscience. I couldn't have done anything alone. But the truth can." Ethan cowered behind me, his eyes flashing with resilience. The community stood with us, and that gave me more strength. As Michael became more cornered, I knew one thing for sure. He was no longer just facing the law, but also a wave of public outrage, and this time he wouldn't escape. Besieged by public opinion, Michael didn't sit idly by. A few days later, a flood of anonymous posts appeared on social media. The content was identical. Linda, a senile old woman, fabricating stories to harm her son. Ethan is just a tool she is using. Not only that, some tabloid newspapers suddenly published articles defending Michael, calling him a misunderstood filial son. My photos were photoshopped with sarcastic captions. "Grumpy old woman turns family into a battlefield." At first, I panicked. Reading those fabrications, my heart tightened, my throat choked. But lawyer Richard reassured me. "Mrs. Linda, this is a typical dirty trick. They want you to break down before going to court. But public opinion is not easily swayed if there is concrete evidence." And indeed, just a few hours later, the online community began to react fiercely. If Mrs. Linda made it up, why is there a clear audio and video recording? What does an 8-year-old child know about fabricating stories? That's absurd. Michael thinks money can buy the media, but the truth cannot be buried. Mrs. Davis was not silent either. She publicly shared the video on her personal page with the message, "I am a witness. This is the truth." That post was shared thousands of times. Other neighbors also came forward to confirm they had seen Michael yelling, even pushing me. Michael, resentful, continued to hire people to spread false rumors. But the more he tried to defame me, the more his panic became apparent. The mainstream press began to scoff. A businessman is trying to distract from justice with trash news. I read the supportive comments, my hands trembling, but my heart filled with a strange emotion. Not triumph, but a strong belief. Justice doesn't just come from the courts, but also from the hearts of the community, ordinary people who can distinguish right from wrong. That night, I watched Ethan sleep soundly in my arms. I whispered softly, "We are no longer alone, my son. Darkness can buy a few pens, but it can never buy the light." And I knew public opinion had become a mirror reflecting Michael's true face, a mirror he could never shatter. On the day of the trial, the sky was overcast, foreshadowing a storm. I held Ethan's hand tightly as we walked into the courtroom. The atmosphere here was entirely different, solemn, cold, and heavy. The spectator seats were packed, with reporters crowded, cameras ready to capture every moment. Michael entered right after. He wore a black suit and a red tie, walking with confidence. When his eyes met mine, he smirked, a smile half challenging, half mocking. Clearly, he believed his formidable legal team and the vast sum of money prepared would break me. The judge banged his gavel, his voice ringing out. "The trial for forgery, asset fraud, and coercion of a minor will now commence." Michael's lawyer stood up first, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, all accusations are based solely on Mrs. Linda's imagination. My client, Mr. Michael Johnson, only did what was necessary to maintain his family's life. Mrs. Linda, being elderly, suffers from memory loss and thus misinterpreted the situation." Murmurs arose. I pursed my lips, shame rising in my throat. Once again they were trying to paint me as an old, senile woman. It was my lawyer, Richard's turn. He stood up, gesturing towards me. "Your Honor, this is not just the account of one mother. We have clear evidence. The original contract with a forged signature, the video recording of the coercion, and witness testimonies. Most importantly, we will prove that Mr. Michael even involved his own son, an 8-year-old child, in his deceitful scheme." Michael frowned, but remained seated nonchalantly, tapping his fingers on the table as if nothing was of concern. He believed everything would be excused. I looked at him, my heart aching, yet resolute. That man was once my son, who had promised to protect his mother, but today he sat opposite me, making me his enemy. Ethan sat close to me, his small hand clutching mine tightly. He whispered, "Grandma, don't be scared. I will tell the truth." That whisper brought tears to my eyes. I knew this trial was not just a battle for assets or honor. It was a fight to protect a child's soul and to let justice be heard. As the judge banged his gavel again, his voice rang out clearly. "We will now call our key witness, young Ethan Johnson." The courtroom fell silent. Ethan sat beside me, his small shoulders trembling. I leaned down and whispered, "You don't have to be afraid. You just need to tell the truth. I'm right here with you." Ethan nodded and slowly walked to the witness stand. The chair was too high for his small frame, making the scene even more poignant. The entire audience seemed to hold their breath, hundreds of eyes following his every move. Lawyer Richard approached, his voice gentle. "Ethan, can you tell the court what happened when your father gave you those papers?" Ethan swallowed, his small hands clutching the edge of the chair. His voice trembled but was clear. Dad gave me some papers. He said I had to sign my name, like practicing my letters. I saw Grandma's name on the paper, and a lot of words I didn't understand. I didn't want to sign, but Dad said if I didn't, he would be angry and wouldn't love me anymore. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Some covered their mouths, others shook their heads in outrage. I could clearly feel my heart clenching with each beat. Michael's lawyer stood up to object. "Your Honor, the boy is only 8 years old. Young children can easily be confused or imaginative. This testimony cannot be considered reliable." The judge raised his hand for silence, then looked directly at Ethan. "Are you sure that what you just said is the truth? Did anyone tell you to say that?" Ethan shook his head vigorously, tears streaming down his cheeks. "No, I'm telling the truth. I love Grandma. I don't want Grandma to lose her home, her land. I don't want Grandma to cry anymore." Those words fell like hammer blows. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the sniffles from the audience seats. I clutched my chest, tears flowing uncontrollably. An 8-year-old child, burdened with the responsibility of accusing his own father. Michael sat there, his face initially pale, then flushed red with anger. He stood up and shouted, "Ethan, you can't say that. They are using you to turn against your father." But the judge's gavel struck sharply. "Order! Mr. Johnson, please sit down." In that moment, I saw Ethan's small shoulders tremble, but his eyes shone with unwavering determination. My son had lost his integrity to greed, but my grandson, this innocent child, had become the light illuminating the truth. I knew this was the pivotal moment. The truth had been spoken from the purest voice, untainted by money or lies. After Ethan's testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom completely transformed. The previous whispers had turned into looks of indignation fixed on Michael. Even some journalists lowered their cameras, watching silently, as if they too had just witnessed a heartbreaking moment. Lawyer Richards seized the opportunity. He continued, "Your Honor, in addition to the child's testimony, we have the original contract with a forged signature, along with a video showing Mr. Michael forcing Mrs. Linda to sign the document. This is an undeniable chain of evidence." The judge attentively flipped through the file, tapping his gavel lightly on the desk. On the other side, Michael's lawyer tried to object, citing confusion, work pressure, and a paranoid elderly mother. But the more he spoke, the more his voice trembled, for the truth was too evident. Finally, the judge looked up, his voice echoing through the courtroom. After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies, the court concludes, Michael Johnson forged signatures, defrauded assets, and coerced a minor into signing illegal documents. The court declares all loan agreements and land transactions null and void. Ownership of the property is restored to its legal owner, Linda Johnson. Mr. Michael Johnson will be prosecuted criminally for fraud and abuse. Bang! The sound of the gavel split the room. A wave of applause and cheers erupted from the audience seats. Mrs. Davis burst into tears, hugging me tightly. Relatives who had previously doubted me now rushed forward, clasping my hands with apologetic eyes. I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face. Ethan rushed over, hugged me, and whispered through sobs, "Grandma, we won. You don't have to cry anymore." Michael was different. He screamed, struggling as the police approached to handcuff him. His eyes were bloodshot, glaring at me with fury. "Mom betrayed me. You ruined my life." I looked directly at him, my voice quiet but firm. "No, Michael, you ruined yourself, and this is just the consequence." The police escorted him away, the jingle of handcuffs echoing in the courtroom. I watched him go, a mixture of pain and relief washing over me. After all, he was still my blood. But justice had to be served. For Ethan, for my husband's memory, and for the sake of righteousness. That day, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunshine. The press crowded around, taking pictures, cheers echoing everywhere. But in my heart, everything settled into one thought. Justice had finally smiled upon me. Ethan held my hand tightly. Amidst the crowd and cameras, only the two of us exchanged smiles, a smile of freedom after dark days. After the trial, Michael was no longer the successful businessman he had proudly claimed to be. The photo of him being handcuffed and led out of the courtroom was plastered all over the newspapers and even featured on the evening news. Below the photo were headlines: "Businessman forged documents, forced 8-year-old son to sign fraudulent contract. Michael Johnson, from role model to deceiver. Friends who used to drink with him, who laughed heartily at lavish parties, now quietly cut off contact. His phone no longer rang with invitations for collaboration, but was filled only with contract cancellation messages and termination notices." An old acquaintance recounted, "I saw Michael on the street yesterday. He called a business partner, but as soon as he introduced himself, the other person coldly hung up. No one wants to be associated with someone known for defrauding his own mother and son." Hearing this made me both pained and chilled. It turned out that with just one verdict, all of Michael's honor, money, and friends vanished like dust. In the early days, Michael still tried to hold his head high, wearing expensive suits and forcing a smile as he walked the streets. But the eyes of the world on him were no longer filled with admiration, but with contempt. He entered his usual cafe, and instead of warm greetings, he was met with whispers. There he is, the mother's betrayer. Forging documents, even forcing his own son to sign, truly worse than an animal. Though he tried to ignore them, each whispered word felt like a knife stabbing his back. He left the cafe with a stiff expression, staggering as if he had lost his soul. A few weeks later, with his reputation in tatters, Michael was expelled from the local business association. The certificates of commendation and awards that once filled his office were taken down, leaving behind splotchy marks on the wall. No one remembered the successful Michael Johnson anymore. He was just the failure in the public's eyes. Ethan once accidentally overheard someone mention his father's name on TV, and he turned to ask me, "Grandma, why do people hate Dad so much?" I hugged him, my voice choked with emotion. "Because he did wrong, and those who do wrong must pay the price, my child." A mix of emotions surged within me. I felt sorry for the boy. He would grow up carrying the shadow of his father's guilt. But I also felt a sense of vindication, for finally, Michael was experiencing the feeling of being shunned by society, a fitting price for his insatiable greed. After the trial, all assets under Michael's name were frozen pending proceedings. The properties he once boasted about to his friends, the suburban mansion, the apartment complex for rent, were successively seized. His bank accounts were empty, and his company was drowning in canceled contracts. In just 2 months, Michael went from a big spender to a complete bankrupt. One morning I heard an acquaintance recount. "Yesterday I saw Michael standing in front of his old company building. The sign had been removed, leaving only a bleak gray wall. Employees walking by didn't even greet him, just shook their heads and hurried past." But what was more brutal than losing money was losing his family. His wife, Melissa, had already endured enough of his lies and unwarranted outbursts. After the press exposed the truth, she packed her bags, took their youngest daughter, and left Michael slumped alone in their cold house. "Do you think I can stay with someone who forced an 8-year-old boy to sign forged documents?" Melissa said directly before slamming the door shut. "You didn't just betray your mother, you betrayed your fatherhood. I've endured enough." As the door closed, Michael plunged into an absolute void. His desperate calls to friends went unanswered. The lavish parties of the past had vanished. Now, all he had were 4 cold walls and the echoing tick of a clock. A neighbor recalled seeing Michael one day sitting on his doorstep, a cheap bottle of liquor in his hand, his vacant eyes staring blankly down the street. No more elegant suits, no more shiny leather shoes, only a crumpled shirt and a disheveled, unshaven face. Ethan accidentally saw this sight on his way home from school. He tugged my hand and quietly asked, "Grandma, why is Dad sitting on the street like a homeless person?" I swallowed hard and could only hold my grandson tightly, because he chose the wrong path. Remember, money can be lost, but if your integrity is lost, you have nothing left. Michael once thought money was boundless power, but now, with his money gone, he realized he had nothing left. No assets, no family, not even a hand to help him up. From a celebrated businessman, he had become a penniless man, abandoned by society, his wife, and his children. That was a blow so fatal that no amount of money could mend it. In the months following the verdict, Michael was no longer himself. He wandered the streets, his clothes rumpled, his eyes dark-ringed, his beard growing unevenly. Without his luxurious home, he had to rent a cheap room in a dingy suburban neighborhood where the walls were stained and the air was thick with mildew. Every morning he dragged himself out of his rented room, sifting through his remaining coins to buy a stale loaf of bread. The locals in the neighborhood looked at him with pity, mixed with contempt. A few young people recognized him, the one who had been on the news for forcing his son to sign fake documents, and started whispering before bursting into laughter. "Look, the once successful businessman. Now he looks no different from a beggar." Michael lowered his head and walked numbly. Every jeer was like a knife slicing at his already shattered dignity. When he tried to find work to start over, he was met with cold rejections. "Sorry, we can't hire someone with a record of financial fraud, and involving children too." Doors closed on him, time and time again. Michael became blacklisted by every company. No one wanted to associate with someone who had betrayed both his own mother and his son. I heard people say that one rainy day, Michael sat huddled under an eave, his drenched coat clinging to him, a cheap bottle of wine beside him. He whispered to himself, his eyes dull, "Just because of a little ambition." I didn't mean for this to happen. But no one believed him anymore, and no one offered him a hand to lift him up. Even his relatives had abandoned him. At gatherings, Michael's name was only mentioned as a bitter lesson. See, wealth doesn't bring happiness. Only integrity and family can keep it. Ethan, a little older, would just quietly lower his head whenever someone spoke of his father. I hugged my grandson and whispered softly, "Don't be sad. Your father chose this path himself. It's not your fault." I know, deep down, Michael is still my son. But he destroyed everything with his own hands. His honor, his family, his relationships, only to live a solitary, miserable life, rejected by society. In the long nights, I prayed silently, hoping he would wake up, even if it was too late. But the truth was, his present was filled only with darkness, and that was the price for his greed and betrayal. As night fell, the rented room where Michael lived was filled only with the sound of wind whistling through the door cracks and the monotonous tick-tock of the clock. He lay stretched out on a torn mattress, a bottle of wine rolling on the floor. In a state of semi-consciousness, images of the courtroom, Ethan's crying, and my determined gaze swirled and haunted him. "I don't want Grandma to cry anymore." Ethan's innocent words echoed in his ears, like knives stabbing his mind. Michael jolted up and grabbed his old phone. His trembling hands dialed a familiar number, mine. For years, that was the number he could call any time to hear his mother's warm voice. But now, he hesitated to the point of breaking out in a sweat. Finally, after a long series of beeps, my voice came through, cold and distant. "Hello? Mom, it's me. I'm sorry. Mom, please let me see Ethan just for a little while. I regret it." "I shouldn't have done that," Michael choked out, each word torn from his chest. At that moment, my heart trembled slightly. After all, he was my flesh and blood, the child I once held. But then, the memory of the forged documents, of the shout, "If you don't sign, you'll face the consequences," and of Ethan's terrified eyes as he was forced to sign, it all rushed back. I tightened my grip on the phone, trying to keep my voice calm. "Michael, it's too late. You have to pay for what you've done. I can't let Ethan continue to be hurt because of you anymore. Please don't call again." I hung up, my heart aching as if it had been torn apart. On the other end of the line, Michael sat there, stunned. He stared at the dark phone screen, his ears ringing. Never in his life had he felt such a vast distance between himself and his mother. A mother that was once so familiar had now become an unhealed scar. He burst into tears, the first time in years. His choked sobs echoed in the empty rented room, mingling with the sound of rain lashing against the window. But no one heard, no one came to his side. Michael had lost everything, and most painfully, he had lost the mother-son bond he had always taken for granted. In the nights that followed, Michael could no longer find sleep. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the scene in the courtroom. Me sitting, holding Ethan, the boy looking directly at his father, his eyes tearful but firm as he said, "Dad told me to sign, or he'd be angry." In his dream, the judge's voice boomed like thunder. "Michael Johnson is found guilty," followed by the sound of a gavel strike. Each time, Michael would jolt awake, his back drenched in sweat, gasping for air, as if he had escaped hell. But in reality, hell was still engulfing him every day. During the day, he wandered aimlessly, trying to call a few old friends. But they all refused or coldly said, "Sorry, Michael, we don't want to get involved anymore." In despair, he returned to his phone, dialing my number again. After a few rings, the automated voice responded coldly, "The number you have dialed is currently unavailable." I had blocked his number. Michael slumped down, his hands trembling. He sobbed like a child, his voice cracking. "Mom, I was wrong. I just want to be forgiven. I don't want to live like this anymore." But on the other end, there was only silence. No familiar voice to comfort him, no arms to hold him. Everything had come to an end. As night fell, the nightmares returned. Michael found himself standing alone in a dark house. From a corner, Ethan emerged, his eyes sad, holding a crumpled stack of papers. The boy asked, "Dad, why did you do that? You said you loved me, but you only scared me." Michael tried to run to embrace his son, but the further he ran, the further the distance grew. Then my figure appeared, my back turned to him, carrying Ethan away. He screamed in despair, but no one turned back. He jolted awake, tears soaking his pillow. Outside, the rain pattered on the tin roof like incessant accusations. In that moment, Michael realized the heaviest punishment was not the chains of the law, but his mother's absolute silence and his son's disappointed gaze. And no matter how many times he called, how many times he pleaded, he would never be forgiven. Time passed, and Michael became like a phantom haunting life. He no longer tried to contact anyone, for all phone numbers were blocked, all doors shut tight. But in his mind, he could never escape Ethan's trembling call of "Grandma" in court, and my cold, pained gaze as I said, "It's too late." Every night, he had the same nightmare. In his dream, he walked into the old house, where he and I once sat by a blazing charcoal fire. But now the house was dark, the four walls stained. On the table lay a crumpled stack of loan papers. Ethan sat there, his small hands trembling, his eyes welling up. "Dad, I don't want to sign anymore. Please don't make me." He screamed, trying to snatch the stack of papers, but immediately the room exploded with the bitter laughter of public opinion, of friends, of his own wife. My voice echoed from afar, "You have betrayed everyone." Michael jolted awake, his heart pounding, sweat pouring down him. But when he opened his eyes, he only saw the moldy ceiling and the dirty rented room. No one was by his side anymore. No one believed in him anymore. During the day, he sat listlessly on a broken-backed chair, the cheap bottle of wine dwindling with each passing hour. The people around the boarding house avoided his gaze. Any child who accidentally passed by was quickly pulled away by their parents, as if afraid the shadow of the sinner would be contagious. In a rare moment of clarity, Michael looked in the mirror. What appeared was no longer the handsome man he once was, but a haggard figure with soulless eyes and pale skin. He reached out to touch the mirror's surface, muttering, "Is this the price I have to pay?" Regret flooded him, but it was too late. The belated tears could not bring back the lost trust, nor could they reclaim the love of his mother and the innocence of his son. On the last night of that memory, he sat slumped on the floor, mumbling half-awake, half-dazed words. "I'm sorry, Mom. Ethan, Dad is sorry. I was wrong." But no one heard, no one answered. Only the sound of rain pounding on the tin roof, cold and indifferent. Michael had fallen to the very depths of loneliness, tormented by nightmares every night, living in a vortex of regret with no hope of forgiveness. And that was the harshest life sentence of all, the sentence of conscience. After all that, my life and Ethan's gradually returned to a peaceful orbit. The family land was returned to its rightful owner, and the small house where I once raised my son with my husband now lit up every evening. No more shouting, no more fake papers lurking on the table. Only the sound of children's laughter and the aroma of hot rice filled the air. I knew I couldn't erase the emotional scars overnight, but instead of letting the past consume me, I chose to turn pain into strength. I began volunteering at the local church, where there were orphaned children and lonely elderly mothers. The first day I arrived, a small boy ran up and hugged me, his eyes shining. "Grandma, can you tell us a story?" I smiled and stroked his hair. In that moment, I saw the reflection of Ethan and Michael when they were little, when they were still innocent, unaware of the darkness of greed. I spent the afternoon telling fairy tales and teaching the children to fold paper cranes. Laughter echoed throughout the room, like medicine soothing the wounds in my heart. A few old women sat nearby, holding my hand and whispering, "Mrs. Linda, thank you. You have brought light to this place." Ethan often accompanied me. He played with the other children, shared his toys, his eyes sparkling with happiness. Every time I looked at my grandson, I told myself, I must keep his heart pure, never let it be blackened like his father's, although memories still sometimes flooded back at night, making me choke up. The dawn brought me new strength. I understood that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but accepting that the past is left behind, and choosing to live for the present. I couldn't change Michael, but I could change how I moved forward, and sow seeds of love for the next generation. That is how I repaid life, and also how I saved myself. After the trial, I always feared that what Ethan witnessed would become a haunting scar on his childhood. An 8-year-old child had to stand in court and watch his father be sentenced. That is a pain no child deserves. But fortunately, love can heal the deepest wounds. I spent every day with my grandson, taking him to school, playing simple games, telling him fairy tales of courage and kindness. I want Ethan to understand that even in the darkest of times, there are still values that never change. One afternoon, as we sat on the porch, Ethan suddenly asked, "Grandma, are you mad at me? Because I signed those papers back then." My heart ached, and I hugged him tightly. "No, Ethan, it's not your fault at all. You were the brave one who spoke the truth. Thanks to you, I kept this house and found justice. You are my greatest pride." Ethan looked up, his round eyes as if a heavy burden had been lifted. He smiled brightly, a smile I once feared would be gone forever. As time passed, he gradually grew stronger. At school, Ethan was loved by his friends for his genuine personality and kindness. He told me that when he saw a friend being bullied, he didn't hesitate to stand up for them, because Grandma taught me not to stay silent in the face of injustice. I smiled, realizing that the painful memory, instead of destroying him, had made Ethan a more understanding and resilient child. Every night before bed, he would often whisper, "Grandma, I'll take care of you later, so you won't be sad anymore." His promise warmed my heart and brought tears to my eyes. It reminded me of the past, of Michael, who made the same promise when he was little. But the difference here is that Ethan truly understood the value of his promise. In my arms, he grew day by day, carrying the light and innocence he had preserved. And I knew that Ethan himself was clear proof that sincere love could save a young soul from the darkness his father had sown. That summer, Ethan and I sat on the front steps watching the sunset paint the sky red. The evening breeze blew gently, carrying the scent of grass. In that moment, I realized that after all the storms, the most precious thing left was not money or fame, but inner peace. Ethan leaned on my shoulder, an innocent smile on his face. "Grandma, I feel very happy right now. I don't need a big house or a fancy car. I just need you." I wrapped my arms around him, tears welling up in my eyes. Those innocent words were the answer to all the pain, all the loss. True family is not about blood ties, but about respect, love, and honesty. I lost Michael. At least I lost the good version of my son from long ago. But I found Ethan, and I found myself again. I learned to stand up, not to remain silent in the face of injustice, and to turn pain into action to protect what is sacred. In the days that followed, I continued my volunteer work, telling my story to orphaned children, not to sow more sadness, but to help them understand that the truth, though painful, always needs to be spoken, and only love can save us from the darkness. Within me, a message began to form, strong and clear. Family is not where you share blood, but where there is love, respect, and where you face storms together. Ethan grew day by day, and I believe that when he grows up, he will become a kind person, because he has seen the depths of betrayal and experienced the healing power of love. Looking into his bright eyes, I whispered to myself, justice doesn't just come from a courtroom. True justice is when a child can smile, no longer afraid, and believe in the future.